Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Friday, everybody. I hope you've had a productive week and can now enjoy a restful weekend ahead. As promised, today we will be looking at developments related to acute geopolitical flashpoints. These are the Sino-Indian border and the South China Sea with the Philippines. Since yesterday's big video on Taiwan, more has happened in regards to the Taiwan Strait, so we need to discuss these updates again too. Let's begin with the Philippines. Rhetoric is heating up between the two sides as tensions in the South China Sea remain high. In response to PRC criticism of President Marcos' comments about Taiwan after the presidential election last weekend, the Philippines Defense Secretary said that the PRC Foreign Ministry spokesperson had, quote, stooped to a low and gutter-level talk, resorting to insulting our president and the Filipino nation, and further debasing herself, the ministry, and party she represents. End quote. The Defense Secretary was reacting to Mao's remarks on Tuesday, telling Marcos to, quote, read more books to properly understand the ins and outs of the Taiwan issue, end quote, after he had congratulated election winner Lai Ching-te, referring to him as president. The full statement is quite remarkable from a small nation to Beijing, and worth quoting at some length. Quote, it is unfortunate that the PRC Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson stooped to such low and gutter-level talk. But then again, we should not at all be surprised, being a nation and people enjoying the privileges, rights and freedoms of a democratic society, that an agent of a party and system of government incompatible with our way of life and who routinely spouts state-sanctioned propaganda and disinformation would go that far and that low. It is unfortunate, but I am myself unsurprised. The spokesperson's statements were on brand. We and the world should not expect more. End quote. The same day, Defense Secretary Teodoro sent a different kind of message to Beijing as well, expressing to US media, quote, the alliance with the US is extremely strong. We would like to build up our capabilities in order for us to be more effective as a contributor to regional stability. End quote. Interestingly, too, the same day, Germany announced that it has promised to donate drones to the Philippines for maritime surveillance operations in the South China Sea. The news was made public by the German foreign minister during a meeting with Philippine President Marcos in Manila. Of course, Beijing isn't pleased with any of this. State-run the Global Times in a piece yesterday called Philippines Continues South China Sea Provocations expressed, quote, amid escalating tensions in the South China Sea, the Philippines persists in its provocative actions and maneuvers despite repeated warnings from China. Manila intends to forge a military agreement with Japan in early 2024. End quote. Fortunately, despite these tough words, the formal mechanisms between the two sides are still functioning. This week, for example, the two sides met for the so-called China-Philippines Bilateral Consultation Mechanism, BCM, on the South China Sea, where they agreed on, quote, improving the sea-related communication mechanism and handling maritime emergencies, end quote. For its part, in its statement, Manila said the two countries, quote, agreed that continuous dialogue is important to keep peace and stability at sea, end quote, and, quote, assured each other of the mutual commitment to avoid escalation of tensions, end quote. Like I said, this is good to see, but tensions remain very high. Quote, the readouts sound positive in terms of managing tensions, but the Philippines is overdue for a resupply mission to Second Thomas Shoal. How the next mission goes will be a big test. And even if the PRC side allows resupply of basic provisions to the Sierra Madre, the grounded ship at the shoal still needs lots of construction materials to reinforce it, and it is highly unlikely the PRC will allow that. End quote. Beijing also continues to play down the importance of the territorial waters to the Philippines, seeing it as a matter of sovereignty for Beijing, but not for Manila. Quote, the primary reason for the persistent tensions between China and the Philippines lies in certain domestic political forces within the Philippines. They aim to use the South China Sea as a significant bargaining chip in negotiations with China, while also leveraging the South China Sea issue as a means to deal with the US. End quote. Then the rhetorical game heated up again. Yesterday, the Global Times published a piece called "With Duplicity, the Philippines Hot-Headedly Positions Itself as US Cannon Fodder." Then a few hours later, the same outlet published another special so-called expert roundtable piece called "Time to Stop Playing Silly Games," in which Philippines ends up as a proxy, expressing, quote, "Tensions between China and the Philippines and the South China Sea have been bubbling up for some time. At the beginning of 2024, the feud almost flared up, with the Philippines continuing its provocative moves and remarks, including the joint patrol with the US and its announcement to develop islands to make them more habitable for troops." End quote. In the roundtable article, Zhou Bo, a senior fellow for the Center for International Security and Strategy at China's prestigious Beijing-based Tsinghua University, reportedly expressed, quote, "I think the possibility of a conflict is not zero, but it is highly unlikely. China has the strength to stop any Philippine ships approaching the rusted vessel on the reef. Even if they have it furnished or decorated like a five-star hotel, we can stop people from getting into that hotel. The only question is, would the US help the Philippines, like escorting Philippine ships to provide materials and food? I don't think so. I believe the US has made it quite clear that it is in its own interest not to have a conflict with China. So why would the US decide to have a conflict with China because of a rusted ship?" End quote. This is a critical point for us to observe here. Is this just a rusted ship from Washington's point of view? Or is it a test of US commitment to its defense obligations to allies in Asia, from Japan to Australia? A test which, if it fails, could undermine its relations with key partners in its wider strategy to compete geopolitically with China. If it is the latter, and Zhou's view is representative of elite Chinese policy makers' thinking, then Beijing may be dangerously misevaluating the situation. Let us now move to India. If you're enjoying today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit the like button. Liking, sharing, and subscribing are all helps for the channel. And for anyone who can go that extra mile and help me keep China Update financially sustainable, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. This is a lot of work, but all your support are all incredible sources of motivation. So thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Despite tough words, both India and China seem to be trying to avoid fueling too much nationalist anger about Sino-Indian border tensions. This week, a video of an awards ceremony for Indian soldiers was quickly taken down as it revealed previously unreported border clashes from 2021 and 2022. India-based outlet The Print reported on the revelations that while negotiations were already going on at the military and diplomatic levels, quote, Chinese troops tried to attack and capture Indian army positions at least twice in eastern Ladakh between September 2021 and November 2022, leading to clashes that left several Chinese soldiers injured, end quote. The piece explains that the sensational revelations, including covert operations by Indian soldiers, came out through an investiture ceremony held by two commands of the Indian Army over the weekend. Quote, new information of the so far unreported clashes give deeper insight into the tension between the two nuclear-armed powers, which have been engaged in a standoff since May 2020. As information trickled out about the clashes, the Western Command took down the YouTube video of the investiture ceremony. End quote. Next up, the most dangerous flashpoint of all, Taiwan. We did a deep dive into Taiwan tensions yesterday and the recent election in Sunday's video. Today's coverage should act as supplementary material to these. In the lead-up to the presidential election from last weekend, US-based polling institute Pew Research Center conducted a survey that examined how people in Taiwan feel about their own identity, as well as how they view the mainland. We quote some of the salient points from the survey here directly. While the Chinese government views Taiwan as a breakaway province, only 3% of people in Taiwan think of themselves as primarily Chinese. Nearly 3 in 10, 28%, think of themselves as both Taiwanese and Chinese, but the largest share by far, 67%, see themselves as primarily Taiwanese. The share of adults in Taiwan who view themselves as at least somewhat Taiwanese has not changed significantly since the centre last asked this question in 2019. Adults in Taiwan under the age of 35 are especially likely to identify as solely Taiwanese, 83%, and women are more likely than men to do so, 72% versus 63%. Identity in Taiwan is tied to politics. Those who consider themselves primarily Taiwanese are most likely to align themselves with the DPP. Meanwhile, those who regard themselves as both Taiwanese and Chinese, or as primarily Chinese, are more aligned with the Kuomintang KMT compared with the DPP. The KMT is closely aligned with neighboring China. Although few in Taiwan identify as primarily Chinese, 40% still have an emotional connection to the mainland. This includes 11% who say they are very emotionally attached to China. Emotional attachment to China is more common among older adults in Taiwan, while 46% of those aged 35 and older report an emotional connection with China. Only 26% of those under 35 say the same. There is no differences in the views by gender. Most people in Taiwan consider China's power and influence a threat. This includes 66% who label it as a major threat, more than say the same about the power and influence of the United States or Russia, 45% and 25% respectively. Younger adults are more concerned than older adults about China's power and influence, as are those with more education. Still, majorities across age groups see China's power and influence as a major threat to Taiwan. Even adults in Taiwan who identify as primarily Chinese, or as both Chinese and Taiwanese, see China's power and influence as a threat. About 2/3 of adults in Taiwan who identify as at least partly Chinese say this, 64%. Similarly, about 6 in 10 adults in Taiwan who say they are emotionally attached to China, 58%, see its power and influence as a threat. Few in Taiwan are happy with how things are going there today. Just 24% express satisfaction, while 32% are dissatisfied and 37% are neither satisfied nor dissatisfied. Attitudes on this question are highly partisan. About half of those who support the governing DPP, 48%, are content with how things are going, compared with just 10% of those who support the opposition KMT. Those who consider themselves primarily Taiwanese are more likely to express satisfaction with how things are going in Taiwan. Similarly, those who have less of an emotional connection to mainland China also express more satisfaction with the way things are going. Here ends our examination of the survey. Meanwhile, Beijing has conducted yet more military operations around Taiwan. Yesterday, Taiwan's defense ministry said that 24 warplanes and 6 ships had been detected in the 24 hours leading up to 6 a.m. local time Thursday morning, expressing, quote, 11 of the detected aircraft had crossed the median line of the Taiwan Strait or entered Taiwan's southwest and north air defense identification zone, end quote. Some 18 of the detected PLA aircraft conducted nighttime patrols. Yesterday, UK-based Financial Times reported that this week Taiwan's Defense Ministry discontinued publishing detailed data on how many of which type of aircraft participated in each action. An analyst at the Institute for National Defense and Security Research, a Defense Ministry-backed think tank in Taiwan, reportedly told the outlet, quote, "The reason they are no longer naming the exact types of drones, for example, is that our Air Force is no longer scrambling fighters to identify each PLA drone in order to limit wear on our aircraft." End quote. The US, of course, is watching all of this closely. Quote, "The pressure campaign against Taiwan continues, and we are watching it in the wake of the elections. Their actions over the past number of years have been pretty consistent. When something occurs that they don't like, they tend to take actions. China is clearly not happy, and the US should not be surprised if they attempt to spin it in the information space as the United States as the aggressor. I don't know how you connect those dots, but they are pretty effective in the information space. Doesn't have to be true, they have just got to say it enough times." End quote. This is exactly why on China Update we make sure to follow exactly what state-run media is writing and what the intelligentsia and policy-making elite are saying in Beijing to get an idea of how these narratives are formed and presented to a domestic audience. Meanwhile, the same outlet, the Financial Times, reports today that, quote, US lawmakers are set for Taipei visits to show support for Taiwan. End quote. Ami Bera, the top Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Indo-Pacific Subcommittee, and two other co-chairs of the Congressional Taiwan Caucus, Republicans Andy Barr and Mario Diaz-Balart, will visit Taiwan next week, reports the outlet. Mike Gallagher, the Republican chair for the bipartisan House China Committee, is expected to travel to Taiwan after the first delegation. Now, I wanted to end today's video with an excerpt from UK-based The Economist in an article called How China's Public Views Taiwan's Elections. Quote, as China's rulers tell it, the Communist Party must control Taiwan and make the whole country safe and strong. Unification brings strength, while division leads to chaos, says the State Council, China's cabinet. This is a law of history, it says. Actually, the party's obsession with Taiwan is a political choice. After 1991, China signed a series of treaties fixing its borders with the Soviet Union and Russia, in effect ceding over 1 million square kilometers of Chinese territory grabbed by Russia in the 19th century. No law of history forbade that decision to forget past wrongs. Political self-interest, then, explains decades of investments to build up the People's Liberation Army with a focus on deterring America from coming to the island's rescue. It explains, too, threats to use force should Taiwan declare formal independence. Those are political calculations. They make the world more dangerous than it needs to be. Still, there is another self-serving choice by China's leaders that arguably keeps the peace in the Taiwan Strait. That choice involves telling the Chinese public, despite much evidence to the contrary, that most Taiwanese long to be part of China, but are thwarted by separatists egged on by America, Japan, and other hostile foreign forces. This is a gambit. Mr. Xi enjoys more room to maneuver as long as lots of ordinary Chinese believe that Taiwan may one day embrace so-called peaceful reunification. End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a wonderful Friday, and I will see you all tomorrow.